What would it take for the Pelicans to make the play-in tournament? Not the playoffs, but just the play-in tournament. How many more games do they need to win? And I'll be honest, the odds might be even worse than you expect. So that obviously means they should tank for Cooper Flag, right? We're going to break down the numbers behind all this in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pelicans, your daily New Orleans Pelicans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Pelicans, the daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Pelicans at NBA, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, available wherever you get your podcasts and available on YouTube. I'm your host, Pelicans Insider, credential member of the media, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. Here with y'all on this Friday, day after Thanksgiving. I hope y'all had a wonderful Thanksgiving, however and whoever you were celebrating with. And I'm very thankful that you're making Locked On Pelicans part of your day, even in a really rough year for New Orleans. And we're going to look at tanking and what it would take just to make the playoffs, because it's not looking good. Yes, it's still somewhat early in the season, but we're about a quarter of the way through. What does New Orleans need to do the rest of the way? And is that realistic? We're going to look at it here. And why, if they do pivot to tanking, it's actually a really smart move this early in the year. So, of course, thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets. If you win your first $5 bet, visit FanDuel.com to get started. Okay, let's get into the numbers here. After losing to the lowly Toronto Raptors, people pointed out their first win in the United States this year, which is actually pretty funny to me. The Pelicans have 63 games left in the season. They are 4-15 right now, 11 games under 500. So let's go through the math here. Say the 10th seed is going to require 46 wins. I think that's a realistic number. That's what ESPN and others are projecting that kind of cutoff to be. The 10th seed, you got to get 46 wins. For New Orleans to do that right now, they would need to go 42-21 the rest of the way. From today forward, this Memphis game tonight forward, 42-21 the rest of the way. That's a 66% winning percentage. You're winning 2 out of every 3 games. But that isn't actually realistic, not just hitting that number, because they're not going to start going and playing, over 600 ball the rest of the way. They're still injured. They're still finding their way, and there's still issues with this team. So say there are 12 games left in 2024. And say you go 5-7 in those games, just over 40%, with Ingram hopefully playing again soon, with Murray, with CJ, with Trey back. That's a realistic number, 40%. 5-7 over the next 12. You're now 9-22 going into the new year. On January 1, you'd be 9-22, 51 games left. Now you need to go from 9 wins to 46 wins. So to get to 46 wins, the Pelicans would need to go 37-14 the rest of the way. That's a winning percentage of 73%. Does that feel remotely realistic right now? And that's just to get into the play-in tournament. When healthy, when Zion comes back, they won't be this bad. Inconsistent, sure. Some bad nights, sure. But this bad? No. But they're not going to be winning 73% of their games or even 66% of their games going forward. It really puts them on the outside looking in. And projections and some of these models and things like that aren't saying a whole lot in the Pelicans' favor here. Basketball-Reference, which I love, has the Pelicans at like a 0% chance of making the playoffs. Like an actual 0% chance of making the playoffs. The Utah Jazz are the only other team that doesn't really have a chance at making the playoffs according to that. Portland at least is 0.1%. But New Orleans, even for the 10th spot, doesn't have any odds in it. They have New Orleans right now as the worst team in the Western Conference. They won't stay the worst team in the Western Conference. But right now, it basically might mean that the season is over. They've won a shade over 25% of their games. You can go to ESPN. They have the NBA Basketball Power Index, which does some projections for them here. The Pelicans' chances to make the playoffs is 0.3, not 3%, 0.3%. So less than 1%. They have a 0% chance at the top six. Just to make the play-in tournament right now, they have New Orleans at 1.8%. 1.8% here. Now they have them projected with basically the fifth worst record in the league and the fifth overall pick. So you're looking at nobody giving this team a chance. And, maybe that rallies you, screw the haters. We're going to prove them wrong. It's just you're over a quarter of the way in, and this is where they are standing right now. That's not a good position to be in here. Sorry, a little under a quarter of the season. They're in a real bad spot, and they're in a big hole to try and dig themselves out of. And most of this is due to injuries. It truly is. Look, coaches are going to lose you games at times. Eric Spoelstra even lost the Miami Heat a game the other day, and he's the best coach in the league, in my opinion. That stuff happens, and that's why you got to look at it over 82 games. Now, that's magnified now. You need your coaching to be the best version of itself when you're kind of facing adversity against the odds here, but they're not getting that. They don't have the health. We don't know when Zion's going to return, and that's truthfully who's going to lead them to a lot of wins or not. So when you're in this situation, it's not good, right? Like, that's putting it mildly here that, yeah, this ain't a good position to be in. When you just look at being 11 games under 500, that is a near impossible task to try and climb back from. Because look, the other teams here are also going to potentially win some games. You need to pass Utah, Portland, Minnesota, Sacramento, and then the San Antonio Spurs just to get the 10th spot. Minnesota, while they're struggling, is going to try and be competitive. So will Sacramento. Portland doesn't want to. Utah doesn't want to, so you can pass them there. But that still puts you at the 13th seed instead of the 15th seed. We'll see. It's TBD on the San Antonio Spurs. More on them a little bit in the next segment here. But that still puts you on the outside looking in. You're basically competing with Sacramento, Minnesota now for the 10th spot, if you can even kind of get into that range, and potentially competing with the Spurs with Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul, remember that name, for the next segment here, to try and get in. The odds don't look good for New Orleans. And the worst place that you can possibly be in the NBA is outside of the playoffs, but not in the bottom 5, 6 teams in the league. You're in that kind of middle ground, no man's land of we were trying to be competitive, but we didn't make it. Now we own the 11th overall pick in the draft. That's not great. You've got to kind of really bottom out. So there's a big competitive advantage reason why the Pelicans should do this sooner rather than later. Normally, you don't pivot to tanking until later, and I said the day they will be the trade deadline, February 6th. But I've got a real important reason for them to do that right now, and that's coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by the Skylight Frame. Look, do you want to celebrate with and stay connected to people who are far away? Are you missing someone this holiday season and want them to be part of the festivities from afar? Do your loved ones live far away, but you wish they could be closer to you? Well, we have the perfect gift for you. Skylight Frame is the touchscreen digital photo frame your whole family will love. Upload thousands of photos with your phone and watch them appear in seconds. Setup takes less than 60 seconds. There's seamless sharing. Invite friends and family to easily share photos via the free Skylight mobile app or email. No account or subscription required. And it's better than social media. It's a great private way to share photos without posting it to the world or having to print and store hard copies. And now, as a special limited time offer for our listeners, get $20 off your purchase of a Skylight Frame when you go to skylightframe.com/NBA. That's SKYLIGHTFRAME.com/LockedOnNBA. Get $20 off your purchase now at skylightframe.com/NBA. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. And now go subscribe to the daily free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. Yeah, we're right in your inbox. One stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That's LockedOnDaily.com. Scroll down till you see the Pelicans logo. Click on that and sign up and start your day with the all-new free Locked On Pelicans newsletter. So we just went over how it's going to be really tough for this team just to get into the play-in tournament, let alone make the actual playoffs. Right? It's going to be a challenge just getting to 46 wins. At minimum, 66% going forward. They're not going to do that right away. So you're looking at near 75% later. That's going to be really, really tough. And then we looked at, trying to be in that middle ground is just not a good spot to be in. So they should tank, right? And look, they're not going to start tanking just yet, realistically. But honestly, they should really consider doing so. They should really consider doing so just given the projections of where they might end up. We said that middle ground, that no man's land is the worst spot you can be in the NBA. It's how you don't get difference makers in the draft, cheap talent on cheap contracts, something New Orleans desperately needs, given how top heavy the roster is in terms of salary right now in the salary cap. So if you know you're not going to make the playoffs right now, why are you competing? And we talked a little bit about this the other day, about not tanking. You want to get data points on the team, right? Who's your core going forward? Do these guys all work together? But I'm going to ask a rhetorical question here. Do we actually need to do that? If CJ and or Ingram aren't going to be on the team next year, do you really need data points on them that are going to win you games? Be like, oh, look, these guys all fit. Well, our salary cap situation says we can't keep them, so we're going to get rid of them. What was the point of those data, of gathering all that data? You probably don't need that. Is that worth not getting a top 4 pick in a really good draft? The worst place you can be is in that middle no man's land in the NBA. And with how bad the season is already going for New Orleans, they actually have a competitive advantage on tanking. And what that means is tank before other teams decide to tank too. The way this team would tank is twofold. They're going to trade away players to duck the luxury tax because they're about $3.5 million into it right now. They're not going to pay the luxury tax, at least not for this team, and they shouldn't pay it for this team. So you're going to need to make a trade that sheds salary. So straight up salary dumping, let's call him a useful player in some capacity. Could be a big salary guy or a middle salary guy or a low salary guy, but you're dumping a useful player and probably using a draft asset in some capacity to do that, to just save some money for the team. Which, yeah, they probably should do that this year with how bad things are going. So you get worse by trading away a talented player just to save salary. We see this all the time at the NBA level. So that's how you're going to do it. And then the other way you do it is by shutting people down. Right? Look, Zion's hamstring, you know what? Let's just have him be out for the rest of the season, something along those lines. Ingram's calf is hurting. Let's just not play him. Simple as that. So you can control the shutting people down part, and that'll get you pretty far in terms of losing games. The other part you don't fully control is the trading away of players. You need a trade partner for that. You can want to trade CJ McCollum all you want or Brandon Ingram all you want, but if no one's willing to take them on or no one has the ability to take them on, that's going to be a problem. You've got to find someone to dance with, or multiple people to dance with if you're into that sort of thing. So here's the thing. You can make these moves now. You don't have to wait until the trade deadline to make some of these moves now. And what you don't want to have happen is someone to take away your trade partners. There are going to be other teams that want to tank. The Utah Jazz will likely trade away somebody. Portland will likely trade away somebody. You have the San Antonio Spurs, who I think might try and trade Chris Paul because they don't want to be winning games right now. If those guys get traded, that's taking away a trade partner for New Orleans because it's a salary dump move. It's not like a team's like, oh, let's get CJ McCollum and we'll be good. It's, hey, here's CJ in a first-round pick to take his salary off of our books. Can you do that? Well, yeah, that's good. We can do that for the right kind of draft capital. But also, you might have the Nets calling that same team and be like, you want Ben Simmons and a first-round pick? Or we'll give you a first-round pick and a second-round pick to take Ben Simmons. And then they're going to take that over CJ McCollum. So right now, if you know you're not going to make the playoffs, start making moves to, I don't want to say fully dismantle the team because that's not what they're going to do here, but make sure your trade partners don't get snapped up with somebody else. The worst situation that you could be in later is in February, late January, early February, trying to trade Ingram, trying to trade CJ McCollum, and now needing to attach an extra draft pick or 2 or 3 for people to take, for other teams to take those players on because the trade market has kind of dried up. Say the Detroit Pistons, one of teams with potential cap space last year that shouldn't be using it, should be taking on bad contracts for draft picks, trades for Ben Simmons and they put him on there. Now you can't trade CJ McCollum there, and now you're stuck with CJ, or you've got to pay even more to get him somewhere else. Take advantage of it now. Move some of these guys now so that your trade partners don't get snapped up by others. Because there will be other teams that are going to try and tank and try and move off of some players. What will Philly potentially do? What will Charlotte potentially do? I don't think Toronto's really going to trade people away. But Utah, Portland, the Spurs definitely might. What might a team like Washington do to clear the books? Are they going to trade Valanciunas somewhere? What might Chicago do with Zach LaVine in that big contract? These teams kind of want to offload some of these players and kind of reboot some of their tanking opportunities here. You don't want to be stuck because you didn't act because, well, maybe we'll try and make the playoffs and we'll fight when we just went over the numbers. It's highly unlikely. It sucks to be saying that. I'm recording this on Thanksgiving morning. It sucks to be saying that right around Thanksgiving that the season is over. But the hole they put themselves in because of injuries and some really bad and uninspired play, despite a lot of the moral victories, there's something here. They're not going to play 25% basketball the rest of the way. It'll go up. But that's not going to be good enough to get to the playoffs. There's no reason to believe at all that this team is going to win 2 out of every 3 going forward, or after that they're going to win 3 out of every 4 going forward, which is what it would take if you don't make market improvements right now. And then you're stuck in a bad situation that's not going to land you one of the top picks in a good draft. And while this is a good draft and you can end up in a better situation, do you want to be drafting Cooper Flagg, Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, or Igor Demin? Or do you want to be drafting Liam McNeely or, Derek Queen? Those aren't the same kind of names as some of those top level guys that feel like they could really be difference makers for the New Orleans Pelicans. The way you get stuck in mediocrity is drafting 10, 11, 12 in every draft, but not really doing anything in the playoffs either. It's fine if you make the postseason. I'm all for 2 extra home postseason games. They're fun no matter what. But this team has not given you any reason to think it would be more than 2 home games whatsoever based on how they've played. So because of all of that, I feel like you need to make your decision now. Don't hurt your draft stock going forward. And look, it's a lottery. You could jump up, you could not jump up. There is some element of random chance to it, but still tanking does pay dividends by at least giving you the best odds. And in a season where you won't make the playoffs anyway, do you honestly need data points on guys that aren't going to be there? I think it's safe to maybe pivot to that right now and take advantage of other teams that are maybe winning, maybe not, don't know what they want to do yet when you have a clear direction. And right now that direction is facing straight down. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments down below. But here's the thing. So we can talk about this all we want. I don't run the team. You don't run the team, right? This conversation doesn't impact anything that the team will actually do. So can this team afford to tank? Will they tank? Let's look at that coming up here next in today's episode of Locked On Pelicans. Today's episode of Locked On Pelicans is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to take on all the action this weekend with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, momentum shifting, you realize what the outcome's going to be. They're updating the spreads. They're updating the lines. Go take advantage of that. You can also check out all the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. So just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And thank you for making Locked On Pelicans your first listen today and every day. We're here Monday through Friday, the #1 Pelicans podcast, covering everything you want to know about this Pelicans team. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Join over 10,000 Pelicans fans on YouTube as well. Here's my question to you today. Let me know in the comments down below. Should the team tank? Simple as that. Like, tank now. Like, start tanking. Look, don't play Ingram in this game or what have you. Just kind of lost season. Focus on the capture the flag, sag for flag. I've seen a couple of good ones here. But that's a guy that does feel like he could be a difference maker for this team. So by the way, your second listen, Locked On Saints. Ross Jackson's looking at 16 head coaches for the New Orleans Saints, talking to other Locked On hosts to get their insight. If it's an offensive coordinator somewhere, is it a former head coach? It's something that only Locked On can provide. And hey, maybe we'll be doing the same thing here on Locked On Pelicans this offseason or during the middle of the season. We'll see. Make that your second listen today. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So can the team afford to tank, or will they do this? So the answer to this is, like, on one hand, no. On another hand, like, yeah, they are. So let's start with the no's. Let's start with the no's, right? Part of it is they just switched from Bally's to over-the-air in their partnership with Gray TV, the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network, Pelicans Plus, and all of that. They'd like to keep subscribers on that. They took a big financial hit to do this. And it's more of an opportunity cost. They weren't going to make the same kind of money that they were going to make with Bally's, even when Bally's came back to them and were like, we'll keep you. And they said, no, it wasn't for the same money that they were going to be making like earlier when Bally's first attempted to drop them. So they were always going to take a big financial hit this season, but they figured they could maybe make some of it back. I don't think they were looking to make the money back this year, but you've still got to keep people engaged, and it probably for them isn't easy right now. I don't think attendance is going to be like putrid. I think people go to games partially because you're bringing kids and just for the atmosphere and fun, whether or not the team loses. You saw that really in the game on Wednesday. No one's going because they're like, we'll get a win. No one was going to go in there and be like, if they win, I'll still pay attention. It was to go and get the hats and just to have fun when a lot of people aren't working the next day and maybe weren't working on Wednesday either. So that's not the biggest deal. But if you want to build your fan base, you've got to win, and you've got to win consistently. And that's something that I have said for years here for the everydayers on the show. When you don't have back-to-back playoff seasons, it really, really hurts you. This stretch run of playing tournament for 3 years in a row has been, in a weird way, some of the best stretch that New Orleans has ever had as a basketball team, as a franchise. This year where you were kind of like, let's be good, we'll get people tuning into our thing, subscribing to Pelicans Plus, and now that's not happening. Now you're not good. That's going to hurt. And if you outright tank, you're basically saying, like, we're not trying to win, so don't watch the games in a sense. Now, I think they're worth watching. I'm obviously going to be watching, but I get that feeling from the fan base here. So can they afford to do that? I mean, maybe. Maybe. They're still making some millions of dollars off of this deal, and I think they were hoping to get more, but I don't think they were necessarily expecting that to really be this year. This was a big long-term project for the New Orleans Pelicans, more so than anything else. But it's definitely going to kind of hurt those subscriptions. That hurts the bottom line and those sorts of things. And that's something that, as a small market team, they're going to definitely be taking into account when it comes to it. So for that reason, I think they might not try and tank. The other part is people will lose their jobs. If they tank, you could maybe blame it on injuries and all of those things, and that gives everybody a pass. But also maybe not. Maybe not. We talked about it in yesterday's show that this roster doesn't look great, and it's not playing the style that they want. And if that's the case, you're pointing the blame at David Griffin, at the front office, and then you've probably got to make a change there. Same thing with head coach Willie Green. Those people really might be out of a job. So, it's one thing to tank if you have some job security assurances, and I don't know if they have that right now. So that puts them in a situation where David Griffin's going to be like, we're not going to tank. I'm going to get fired. We're going to go try and win. Same thing for Willie Green. I'm not going to tank. I'm not going to purposely lose games. I want to win. I want to, be the coach of this team and not be the head coach of the team. So there's that kind of self-preservation into this too that might prevent them from tanking. But then that comes back down. So those are the reasons why no, right? Like, that's the one hand of no. But the other hand is, like, they might have to do this anyway. they might have to do this anyway. We just went over them being in the luxury tax. This team is not worth paying the luxury tax for. Save that $3.5 million. Save the tax that you would pay. So call it like a $5.5 million savings there. And then you get the big check from the NBA for $18 or so million. That means you can tank and, not have people watching Pelicans Plus versus being competitive, not ducking the luxury tax and all of those things. So they might have to, because they do need to trade one of CJ McCollum or Brandon Ingram, because they're not going to pay the luxury tax. Those moves make the most sense. More on, say, Ingram in a week or so. And that is kind of the reality of the situation. Honestly, the financial situation just might mean they need to do this as is. So there is a very realistic scenario where, they don't want to tank, but they're forced to just because of the financials when it comes to it. I don't think they want to. I think you could have Willie Green and David Griffin be like, well, we didn't play 66% basketball going forward, but we won at almost a 60% rate. And you missed the playoff, the 10th seed by 3 games. You're like, but look at how we improved. Once we got healthy, there was proof of concept. There's something to that. Next year, you don't want next year to be a complete wash either. But if you tank, it probably means it does, because you're still trading away good players. So that's kind of the position that the Pelicans find themselves in. But if you're going to tank, if you're going to duck the luxury tax, do it sooner rather than later. Do it sooner rather than later, and make sure you can actually make the move you want and you're not giving up too much. That's the competitive advantage here. The last thing you want to see this team do is trade away their own draft picks to dump guys. Look at teams like the Brooklyn Nets and what they've done, where the James Harden stuff, they traded away their picks. Then they were still bad and they weren't even having their own picks. And they kind of went to move heaven and earth to get their own draft picks back, because those are the most valuable things to them. Those Milwaukee Bucks picks, should Giannis walk or they trade them away, become really valuable. They're not going to tank because they don't own those draft picks. But if you get them those draft picks back, maybe they trade Giannis, something along those lines, right? We saw this with the Atlanta Hawks. They don't own their picks. They're not good enough. Should they trade Trae Young to San Antonio just to get their own draft picks back from the DeJounte Murray trade? Ownership here needs to not let, we'll talk more about this later, not let David Griffin trade away future draft picks, at least Pelicans draft picks, for talent. Not that they would anyway, but you certainly shouldn't do that in a salary dump either. You've got to try and kind of keep the long-term health of the franchise in mind with this. That probably just means tanking and trading away Brandon Ingram for nothing, or CJ McCollum for nothing, and trying to kind of just get off those deals as cheap as you can. It's the unfortunate reality of the situation. What do you think the Pelicans should do? Let me know in the comments down below on YouTube. That's going to do it for this episode of Locked On Pelicans. Happy day after Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you all. We'll be back on Monday breaking down what we saw from the NBA Cup tonight and get you set for everything New Orleans Pelicans. There's a lot more news coming. It's going to be interesting to cover it all. So that's why you want to subscribe to Locked On Pelicans, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jake Madison, at NOLA Jake on Twitter. I'll be back with y'all on Monday.